Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. Afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, as thousands of tourists gathered for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood James Mitchell, a 28-year-old United States Marine sergeant on his first visit to London. His muscular frame was dressed in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. The way he stood with perfect posture, his alert eyes scanning the crowd, and his disciplined movements all screamed military training. James had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. His body carried the scars of combat, and his mind held memories that sometimes kept him awake at night. This London vacation was supposed to be his break from the military world, a chance to see something peaceful and beautiful. But as he watched the British Royal Guards marching in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats, he felt something stir inside him that he had not expected. The ceremony was impressive. The guards moved with mechanical precision, their faces emotionless beneath the fur of their ceremonial hats. Every step was measured, every turn was exact, and every movement was synchronized with the others. James found himself studying their technique, comparing it to his own military training. He noticed small details that other tourists missed, the way they controlled their breathing, how they kept their eyes fixed straight ahead, and the incredible discipline it took to remain motionless for such long periods. One guard in particular caught his attention. The man was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with a strong jawline visible beneath his bearskin hat. There was something different about this guard. While all the others moved with practiced precision, this one seemed to have an extra edge of awareness. James noticed how the guard's eyes, though appearing to stare straight ahead, actually tracked movement in his peripheral vision. This was not just ceremonial training, this was combat awareness. The guard's name was William Thompson, though none of the tourists knew this. He was a veteran of the British Army, having served in both Afghanistan and Northern Ireland before joining the Household Division. Like James, he carried his own collection of memories from war zones. The ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace were an honor, but they also provided him with a peaceful routine after years of high-stress combat situations. As William stood at his post, he became aware of someone watching him more intently than the usual tourist snapshots and casual glances. His trained senses picked up on the focused observation, and through his peripheral vision he located the source. It was the American across the courtyard, clearly military by his bearing, probably a Marine judging by his confident stance and the way he carried himself. The 2 veterans locked eyes across the crowded courtyard, though neither moved from their position. In that moment there was an instant recognition between them, not of faces but of shared experience. They both knew what it felt like to carry a weapon in hostile territory, to make life-and-death decisions in split seconds, and to depend completely on their training and their brothers in arms. James felt a challenge forming in his mind. It was not hostile or aggressive, but rather a professional curiosity about how good this British Guard really was. Could this ceremonial soldier match the combat readiness of a United States Marine? The thought was not born from arrogance, but from the natural competitive spirit that existed between elite military units around the world. William sensed the challenge in the American's steady gaze. He had encountered this before. The unspoken question of who was better trained, who was more disciplined, who could maintain their composure longer. It was a game that soldiers played across cultures and nationalities, a way of testing themselves against their peers without actual conflict. The crowd around them continued to chatter and take photographs, completely unaware of the silent communication happening between the 2 warriors. Children pointed excitedly at the colorful guards. Elderly tourists consulted their guidebooks, and teenagers posed for selfies. But in the space between James and William, something else was building. James made the first move. Without breaking eye contact, he shifted his stance slightly, moving from a casual tourist posture to a more formal military bearing. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted slightly, and his hands moved to a position behind his back. Not quite attention, but clearly a military stance. It was subtle enough that most observers would not notice, but any trained soldier would recognize it immediately. William caught the challenge and accepted it. While maintaining his required position as a guard, he made his own subtle adjustment. His already perfect posture became even more rigid. and he shifted his weight almost imperceptibly to demonstrate his balance and control. To the tourists, he looked exactly the same as before, but to James the message was clear. Game on. What followed was unlike anything either man had experienced before. They began a wordless conversation conducted entirely through body language and military bearing. James would shift his weight from one foot to the other, demonstrating his ability to remain stable and alert. William would respond by holding an even more perfect position, showing that he could maintain ceremonial standards while simultaneously engaging in this unspoken competition. The tourists around them had no idea that they were witnessing the beginning of what would become the most unusual display of military discipline ever seen at Buckingham Palace. Two warriors from different nations, trained by different systems, were about to engage in a battle of wills that would test every aspect of their military training. And all of it would happen in complete silence, with nothing more than subtle shifts in posture and unwavering eye contact. As the afternoon progressed, more and more people in the crowd began to notice something unusual was happening, though they could not quite put their finger on what it was. The American tourists seemed unusually focused, and one of the guards appeared to be engaged in some kind of silent standoff. Word began to spread quietly through the crowd, and gradually more eyes turned toward James and William, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. The tension in the courtyard grew thicker, as more tourists began to notice the strange energy between the American visitor and the British Royal Guard. What had started as a casual challenge between two military professionals was evolving into something much more significant. James Mitchell felt his heart rate increase slightly, not from nervousness but from the familiar excitement of competition. This was the closest thing to combat adrenaline he had experienced since leaving active duty. William Thompson, despite his ceremonial obligations, found himself equally engaged in this unexpected contest. His years of training had taught him to compartmentalize his attention, and he was able to maintain his guard duties while simultaneously focusing on the silent duel developing with the American Marine. Every fiber of his being was alert and ready, just as it had been during his deployments in hostile territories. The challenge escalated when James decided to test William's peripheral awareness. Slowly and deliberately, he began to move around the edge of the crowd, never breaking eye contact but changing his position to see if the guard could track his movement without turning his head. This was a skill that both men had learned in combat zones. The ability to maintain visual contact with multiple threats while appearing to focus on something else entirely. William rose to the challenge magnificently. Without moving his head even slightly, he tracked James's movement through his peripheral vision. As James moved to his left, William's eyes shifted almost imperceptibly to maintain their connection. To any observer, the guard appeared to be staring straight ahead in perfect ceremonial fashion, but James could tell that he was being watched and tracked with military precision. The crowd around them began to sense something unusual happening. Conversations grew quieter as people noticed the intense focus between the two men. A young woman with a camera lowered it slowly, realizing she was witnessing something more interesting than the standard tourist photos. An elderly gentleman who had served in the Royal Navy during World War II recognized the bearing of both men and whispered to his wife that these were two professional soldiers, sizing each other up. James completed his semicircle around the crowd and returned to his original position, impressed by William's ability to track him without breaking protocol. It was time for the next level of the challenge. He shifted his stance again, this time moving into a perfect parade rest position, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back, chin up, eyes forward. It was a clear signal that he was ready to match the British Guard's ceremonial perfection with his own military discipline. William acknowledged the escalation by making his own adjustment. He deepened his stance slightly, demonstrating the rock-solid foundation that allowed Royal Guards to stand motionless for hours during ceremonial duties. His breathing became even more controlled, and every muscle in his body seemed to settle into perfect alignment. To the growing number of observers, it looked like he had somehow become even more statue-like than before. The wordless conversation between them continued to develop complexity. James began a series of subtle muscle tensions and releases, starting with his shoulders and working down through his arms and torso. It was a technique he had learned for maintaining alertness during long periods of guard duty, and he was curious to see if the British soldier would recognize and respond to it. William not only recognized the technique but responded with his own version of it. He began an almost invisible series of controlled muscle contractions, starting with his core and radiating outward. It was a method taught to royal guards for maintaining perfect posture during extended ceremonies, and it demonstrated a level of body control that impressed even James. By this time, a significant portion of the crowd had noticed that something extraordinary was happening. Tourists who had been focused on taking pictures of the traditional ceremony were now watching the silent interaction between the American and the British Guard. Whispered conversations spread through the crowd as people tried to understand what they were witnessing. A group of British teenagers initially thought it might be some kind of performance art. An American family wondered if the tourist was somehow part of the ceremony. A Japanese tour group found themselves completely captivated by the display of discipline and control they were watching. Even the other royal guards began to notice that something unusual was happening with their colleague, though their own training prevented them from breaking their ceremonial positions to investigate. The silent duel entered a new phase when James decided to test William's mental focus along with his physical control. He began a slow, controlled breathing exercise that was visible to anyone watching carefully. It was a technique used by snipers and special forces operators to maintain calm and accuracy in high-stress situations. Each breath was precisely timed and measured, creating a rhythm that was both meditative and militaristic. William immediately recognized what James was doing and responded with his own breathing demonstration. The controlled respiration techniques taught to royal guards were designed to help them maintain composure during long ceremonies and unexpected situations. His breathing became so perfectly regulated that it seemed almost mechanical, each inhalation and exhalation timed to the second. The crowd was now completely mesmerized. What had started as a normal tourist day at Buckingham Palace had become something none of them had ever seen before. The level of discipline and control being displayed by both men was beyond anything most civilians had ever witnessed. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders for better views, and elderly visitors found benches to sit on so they could watch more comfortably. A British Army veteran in the crowd recognized what was happening and began explaining to those around him that they were watching a professional military challenge. Word spread quickly, and soon people throughout the courtyard understood that they were witnessing a unique contest between two elite warriors from different nations. James and William were both fully committed to the challenge now. What had started as a casual test of skills had become a serious demonstration of military excellence. Neither man was willing to back down, and both were discovering that their opponent was far more skilled than they had initially expected. The respect between them grew with each subtle movement and controlled response. As the afternoon wore on, the intensity of their silent duel continued to build, and the crowd of spectators grew larger and more engaged. Camera phones appeared throughout the audience as people began recording what they realized was a once-in-a-lifetime display of military discipline and professional pride. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting new shadows across the courtyard. But neither James Mitchell nor William Thompson seemed affected by the changing light. Their silent contest had now lasted over an hour, and what had begun as a simple challenge between military professionals had transformed into something approaching an art form. The crowd around them had grown to nearly 300 people, all drawn by the magnetic intensity of what they were witnessing. James realized that he was facing an opponent of exceptional skill. William's ability to maintain perfect ceremonial posture while simultaneously engaging in their wordless competition demonstrated a level of training and mental discipline that commanded serious respect. The Marine decided it was time to introduce a psychological element to their duel. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to shift his weight from foot to foot in a rhythmic pattern that required incredible balance and muscle control. The technique James was employing came from advanced combat training, designed to maintain readiness for instant movement while appearing completely stationary. Each weight shift was so subtle that most observers would not notice it, but it required constant micro-adjustments in posture and muscle tension. It was both a display of physical control and a mental challenge, as maintaining the rhythm demanded unwavering concentration. William recognized the complexity of what James was attempting and felt a surge of competitive spirit. He responded by initiating his own advanced technique, a method of controlled muscle isolation that allowed him to tense and release different muscle groups in sequence while maintaining his ceremonial stance. It was a skill taught to the most elite royal guards for maintaining blood circulation and muscle readiness during extended duties. To the crowd, both men appeared to be standing perfectly still, but the trained eyes of the few military veterans in the audience could see the incredible sophistication of what was happening. A retired Royal Marines officer whispered to his companion that he had never seen such a display of controlled movement and mental discipline. An American Air Force veteran called his buddies on his phone to describe what he was witnessing. The psychological intensity of their duel began to affect the crowd in unexpected ways. The constant focus and discipline being displayed by both men created an almost hypnotic effect on the observers. Conversations became increasingly quiet, and many people found themselves holding their breath without realizing it. Children stopped fidgeting and stared with wide eyes. Even crying babies seemed to sense the extraordinary nature of what was happening and fell silent. A group of British military academy cadets had arrived for a scheduled tour and found themselves completely absorbed in watching the contest. Their instructor, a veteran sergeant major, recognized immediately what was taking place and began pointing out the subtle techniques being used by both participants. The cadets were getting a real-world lesson in advanced military bearing that no classroom could provide. James decided to raise the stakes again. He began incorporating elements of martial arts breathing into his routine, techniques he had learned during hand-to-hand combat training. The breathing pattern was designed to enhance physical performance and mental clarity while maintaining complete emotional control. Each breath was precisely timed and coordinated with subtle muscle movements that enhanced his overall stance and bearing. William met this challenge with techniques drawn from his own diverse training background. Before joining the Royal Guards, he had trained in various military disciplines including close protection work and ceremonial drill. He began a breathing pattern used by bodyguards and special forces operators, designed to maintain maximum alertness while appearing completely relaxed and non-threatening. The crowd sensed another escalation in the intensity of the silent duel. Camera phones were now recording from multiple angles, and several professional photographers who had been covering the ceremony found themselves focusing entirely on the unusual contest. Social media posts began appearing with hashtags like silent duel and military discipline, and within minutes people around the world were learning about the extraordinary event taking place at Buckingham Palace. A news reporter who had been covering a different story noticed the gathering crowd and the unusual focus of attention. She began interviewing spectators and quickly realized that she was witnessing something newsworthy. Her camera operator began filming the interaction between James and William, trying to capture the subtle movements and incredible tension that was keeping hundreds of people mesmerized. The other royal guards on duty were becoming increasingly aware of the unusual situation involving their colleague. While their own training prevented them from breaking their positions, they could sense the energy and attention focused on William's position. Their sergeant of the guard had noticed the crowd gathering and was monitoring the situation to ensure that ceremonial protocols were being maintained. James felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool London weather. The mental and physical demands of maintaining his advanced techniques for over an hour were beginning to test even his considerable endurance. But he also felt more alive and focused than he had since leaving active military duty. This challenge was providing him with the kind of mental engagement and purpose that he had been missing in civilian life. William was experiencing similar effects. The familiar strain of extended concentration and physical control reminded him of his most challenging military assignments. But rather than fatigue, he felt energized by the opportunity to demonstrate the excellence of British military training to an obviously skilled American opponent. This was what he had trained for: the ability to perform at the highest level under pressure and scrutiny. The silent communication between them had evolved into something almost telepathic. Each man could sense when the other was about to change techniques or introduce a new element to their contest. They had developed a rhythm and flow that allowed them to challenge each other while maintaining perfect synchronization. It was like watching an incredibly sophisticated dance performed by two masters of their craft. The crowd had become completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing the peak intensity of this remarkable display. Every person in the courtyard was focused on the two men, and the normal sounds of London traffic and city life seemed to fade into the background. It was as if the entire area had become suspended in time, with everyone holding their breath to see what would happen next in this extraordinary test of military discipline and human will. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. The courtyard at Buckingham Palace had transformed into an arena of silent warfare. 2 hours into their wordless duel, James Mitchell and William Thompson had pushed their contest beyond anything either had experienced in their military careers. The crowd, now approaching 500 people, stood in absolute silence, creating an atmosphere so intense that it seemed to vibrate with energy. James could feel the burn in his muscles from maintaining his advanced stance and controlled movements for such an extended period. His Marine training had prepared him for physical endurance, but this challenge demanded something more, a combination of mental focus, physical control, and psychological strength that tested every aspect of his military development. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool afternoon air, but his expression remained completely composed. The American Marine decided to introduce what he considered his ultimate technique. He began a series of micro-movements that incorporated elements from sniper training, special forces conditioning, and martial arts discipline. Each adjustment was so small that it was barely visible, but together they created a demonstration of body control that approached the limits of human capability. His breathing remained perfectly steady while every muscle, fiber in his body worked in precise coordination. William felt the challenge escalate and knew he was facing a moment that would define not just this contest, but his understanding of his own capabilities. He responded with techniques that few people even among the Royal Guards had mastered. Drawing from his most advanced training in ceremonial duty, close protection work, and combat readiness, he began a routine that transformed him into what appeared to be a living statue with the controlled precision of a human machine. The crowd watched in awe as both men seemed to transcend normal human limitations. A child in the audience whispered to her mother that the men looked like superheroes, and the observation was not far from the truth. The level of physical and mental discipline they were displaying seemed to push beyond what most people believed possible. Among the spectators, a group of Olympic athletes who were visiting London found themselves studying the incredible body control being demonstrated. A gymnast commented that the balance and muscle isolation she was witnessing exceeded anything she had seen in elite sports. A marathon runner was amazed by the endurance and mental focus both men were maintaining without any apparent strain on their breathing or composure. The psychological element of their duel had become as important as the physical aspects. James and William were engaged in a battle of wills that tested not just their training, but their fundamental character. Each man was determined not just to prove his own excellence, but to honor the military traditions and training that had shaped them. This had become about more than personal pride. It was about representing their nations, their services, and their brothers in arms. Group of military historians who had come to observe the changing of the Guard ceremony found themselves witnessing what they would later describe as one of the most remarkable displays of military discipline in modern times. They began taking detailed notes, recognizing that they were documenting something unprecedented in the relationship between Allied military forces. The intensity of the contest began affecting people throughout the courtyard in unexpected ways. Several individuals reported feeling a sense of calm and focus that they had never experienced before, as if the incredible concentration of the two men was somehow contagious. Others described feeling inspired by the demonstration of human potential and self-control they were witnessing. James felt his mind entering a state that he had only experienced a few times during his most challenging military operations. It was a zone of perfect clarity and focus where physical discomfort disappeared and time seemed to slow down. Every sensation was heightened while simultaneously feeling completely manageable. This was what peak performance felt like, and he realized that this silent duel was pushing him to levels of excellence he had never achieved before. William experienced a similar transformation. The techniques he was employing required such complete integration of mind and body that he felt like he was operating at maximum human potential. The fatigue that should have accumulated over 2 hours of intense concentration seemed to have been replaced by a flow of energy that sustained and energized him. He felt connected not just to his own training but to the centuries of British military tradition he represented. The other royal guards on duty were now fully aware that something extraordinary was happening with their colleague. While maintaining their own ceremonial positions, they could sense the energy and focus that William was projecting. Their sergeant of the guard had quietly positioned himself where he could observe the situation while ensuring that overall ceremony protocols continued to be maintained. News of the unusual event was spreading beyond the physical crowd. Through social media and word of mouth, videos of the silent duel were being shared across multiple platforms, and military personnel around the world were beginning to take notice. Comments from soldiers, veterans, and military enthusiasts were expressing amazement at the level of discipline and control being displayed. The British teenager, who had first noticed the contest 2 hours earlier, had become an unofficial documenter of the event, live-streaming the entire interaction and providing commentary for viewers around the world. Her audience had grown to thousands of people who were watching this unprecedented demonstration of military excellence. James and William had reached a level of mutual respect that transcended their original challenge. Each man recognized that he was facing an opponent of extraordinary skill and character. What had begun as a test of abilities had evolved into a celebration of military excellence and the bonds that exist between professional warriors, regardless of nationality. The sun was beginning to set over London, casting long shadows across the courtyard, but neither man showed any sign of fatigue or willingness to concede. If anything, the approaching evening seemed to intensify their focus and determination. The crowd sensed that they were building towards something even more remarkable, and the anticipation in the air became almost unbearable. As the third hour of their wordless duel approached, both James Mitchell and William Thompson prepared to push themselves and their contest to levels that would test the very limits of human discipline and will. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. As the third hour of their incredible contest began, the atmosphere in the courtyard had become electric with tension and anticipation. The crowd, now exceeding 800 people, had organized itself into a rough amphitheater around James Mitchell and William Thompson. Word had spread throughout London about the extraordinary display taking place at Buckingham Palace, and people were arriving from across the city to witness what many were calling the greatest demonstration of military discipline ever seen. James felt as though he had transcended normal physical limitations. The techniques he was now employing drew from every aspect of his military training: the endurance of marine conditioning, the precision of marksmanship training, the focus of combat operations, and the mental discipline of survival school. His body had become a perfectly calibrated instrument of controlled movement and stillness, responding to his will with mechanical precision. The Marine's reputation was spreading through the crowd as people shared information about what they were witnessing. Someone had identified him as Sergeant James Mitchell, a decorated combat veteran with multiple tours of duty. His service record included commendations for valor under fire and leadership in difficult situations. The crowd began to understand that they were watching not just a skilled soldier, but a warrior with proven combat experience. William Thompson had entered what his training instructors would have called the zone of ultimate performance. Every fiber of his being was focused on maintaining perfect control, while continuously adapting to the evolving challenge from his American opponent. The centuries of British military tradition seemed to flow through him, connecting him to generations of soldiers who had faced their own tests of courage and discipline. Information about William was also circulating among the spectators. His service with the British Army in Afghanistan had earned him recognition for bravery and tactical excellence. His selection for the Royal Guards was based not just on his ceremonial bearing but on his proven ability to perform under extreme pressure. The crowd realized they were witnessing a contest between two genuinely elite warriors. The psychological dimension of their duel had evolved into something approaching a shared meditation. Both men had achieved a state of consciousness where the boundary between competitor and opponent seemed to dissolve. They were no longer fighting against each other but rather collaborating and pushing the limits of human potential. Each challenge and response had become part of a larger symphony of disciplined movement and controlled power. Among the spectators, a group of neuroscientists from a nearby university had arrived to observe what they described as a unique example of extreme human performance. They were documenting the physiological and psychological aspects of sustained peak concentration, noting that both men appeared to be operating in a state of optimal human function that was rarely seen. Outside of laboratory conditions, the media presence had grown significantly as news organizations realized the global interest in this story. International news crews were setting up equipment, and reporters were conducting interviews with military experts who could explain the significance of what was being demonstrated. The story was being broadcast live to audiences around the world. James introduced a new element to their contest by beginning a sequence of movements that incorporated principles from meditation, martial arts, and advanced military training. Each motion was so controlled and deliberate that it appeared to be happening in slow motion. Yet the precision and power behind every adjustment was unmistakable. He had achieved a state where thought and action had merged into a single flowing process. William responded with techniques that represented the pinnacle of British military ceremonial training. His movements became so perfectly controlled that they seemed to defy normal human limitations. Every muscle, every breath, every heartbeat appeared to be under conscious command. He had become a living demonstration of what could be achieved through absolute dedication to excellence and discipline. The crowd was now experiencing something that psychologists would later describe as collective transcendence. The incredible focus and discipline being displayed by both men had created an atmosphere where normal social barriers seemed to disappear. Strangers were standing together in silence, united by their shared witness to something extraordinary. Many people reported feeling a sense of peace and inspiration that would stay with them for years. A group of military chaplains from various faiths had gathered among the spectators and were quietly discussing the spiritual dimensions of what they were witnessing. They observed that the level of self-control and dedication being demonstrated reflected the highest ideals of warrior traditions from around the world. The contest had become a meditation on the potential for human excellence and the bonds that unite. Professional soldiers, the British teenager who had been documenting the event since its beginning, announced to her growing online audience that she was witnessing something that would never be forgotten by anyone present. Her live stream had attracted viewers from dozens of countries, and the comments were flowing in multiple languages, all expressing amazement at the display of military excellence. James felt a profound sense of connection, not just to William, but to the entire military brotherhood he represented. Every Marine, soldier, sailor, and airman who had ever pushed themselves beyond their perceived limits was present in spirit during this contest. The discipline and dedication he was demonstrating honored every service member who had faced their own tests of character, and William experienced a similar sense of representing something larger than himself. The traditions of British military service, the sacrifices of generations of soldiers, and the ideals of duty and honor all seemed to flow through his perfectly controlled movements. He was not just competing with an American Marine. He was celebrating the warrior spirit that transcended national boundaries. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the courtyard in shades of gold and amber. The lighting seemed to enhance the almost mythical quality of what was taking place, as if the two men had become figures from an epic tale of military valor and human excellence. As the third hour of their wordless duel continued, both James Mitchell and William Thompson prepared for what they sensed would be the climactic phase of their extraordinary contest. The crowd held its collective breath, knowing they were about to witness the ultimate test of military discipline and human will. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. The golden hour of sunset had arrived, and the courtyard at Buckingham Palace seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The contest between James Mitchell and William Thompson had entered its fourth hour, transforming from a simple military challenge into something that witnesses would remember for the rest of their lives. The crowd, now numbering over 1,000 people, stood in complete silence, creating an atmosphere of reverence and anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the ancient stones of the palace. James felt as though he had discovered capabilities within himself that he never knew existed. The advanced techniques he was now employing pushed beyond everything he had learned in Marine training, drawing from reserves of strength and focus that seemed to come from some deeper source. His body moved with the precision of a master craftsman working with the finest tools, every adjustment calculated and controlled with mathematical precision. The exhaustion that should have overwhelmed him hours ago had been replaced by a strange energy that seemed to flow from his connection with William and the shared pursuit of excellence they were engaged in. This was no longer about proving superiority. It had become a collaborative exploration of the absolute limits of human potential. Each man was pushing the other toward levels of performance that neither could have reached alone. William had achieved a state of consciousness that his instructors had described, but that he had never fully experienced until this moment. Every aspect of his being, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, was perfectly aligned and focused on the task at hand. He felt connected not just to his own training, but to centuries of British military tradition, as if the spirits of countless warriors were guiding and supporting his efforts. The techniques he was now employing represented the absolute pinnacle of ceremonial military bearing combined with combat readiness. His body had become a perfectly tuned instrument, capable of maintaining impossible levels of control and precision. Every breath, every micro-movement, every muscle tension was orchestrated with the skill of a master conductor leading a world-class symphony. The psychological bond between the two men had deepened to a level that transcended normal human interaction. They were communicating through subtle changes in posture and breathing patterns, engaging in a conversation that was more intimate and profound than most people achieve through words. Each understood exactly what the other was feeling and experiencing, creating a shared consciousness focused on the pursuit of perfection. Among the spectators, military leaders from various nations had gathered to witness what many were calling the greatest display of military discipline in modern history. A retired American general stood beside a British admiral, both watching in silence as their respective services were represented by these two extraordinary individuals. Comments were being whispered about the implications of this demonstration for military training and the understanding of human potential. The media coverage had expanded to international proportions. News crews from major networks around the world were broadcasting live from the courtyard, and military experts were providing commentary about the significance of what was taking place. Social media had exploded with videos, photographs, and commentary about the London military duel, as it was being called online. James introduced what he considered his ultimate technique, a combination of movements and breathing patterns that incorporated everything he had learned about peak human performance. The sequence required such complete integration of mind and body that it appeared to be a form of moving meditation. His concentration had become so intense that the rest of the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the pure focus of his interaction with William. William responded with what he knew would be his most challenging demonstration. Drawing from the deepest levels of his training and experience, he began a routine that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible while maintaining perfect ceremonial bearing. His movements became so controlled and precise that they seemed to operate outside normal time, each adjustment flowing seamlessly into the next with mechanical perfection. The crowd sensed that they were witnessing the climactic moment of this extraordinary contest. The level of intensity and focus being displayed by both men had reached a peak that seemed to charge the very air around them with energy. Many spectators reported feeling physically affected by the demonstration, as if the incredible concentration of the two warriors was creating a field of influence that extended throughout the courtyard. A group of Olympic coaches who had been observing the contest found themselves completely re-evaluating their understanding of human performance. The endurance, control, and mental focus being demonstrated exceeded anything they had seen in elite athletics. They began discussing how the principles being displayed might be applied to training in other fields that required peak human performance. The British teenager, who had been documenting the event, announced to her global audience that she believed they were witnessing a moment that would be studied and remembered for generations. Her live stream had attracted hundreds of thousands of viewers from around the world, and the comments were flowing in dozens of languages, all expressing amazement and respect for what was being demonstrated. As the sun continued its descent, the lighting in the courtyard became increasingly dramatic. The long shadows and golden light seemed to transform James and William into figures from an epic legend. Two warriors engaged in a contest that celebrated the highest ideals of military service and human excellence. The visual impact was so striking that artists and photographers in the crowd were frantically capturing images that they knew would become iconic. The other royal guards on duty had been quietly observing their colleagues' extraordinary performance throughout the afternoon. While maintaining their own ceremonial positions, they felt a sense of pride and honor at being present for what they recognized as a defining moment in the history of their unit. Their sergeant of the guard had received permission from higher authorities to allow the contest to continue, recognizing its significance. James felt a profound sense of completion approaching. The journey he had taken through this wordless duel had taught him things about himself and his capabilities that years of traditional training had not revealed. He had discovered reserves of strength, focus, and discipline that would change his understanding of what was possible in both military and civilian life. William experienced a similar sense of approaching resolution. The contest had pushed him beyond every limit he had previously encountered, revealing new dimensions of his own potential and deepening his connection to the military traditions he represented. He felt honored to have been part of something that celebrated the warrior spirit in its purest form. As the fourth hour of their extraordinary duel continued, both men prepared for what they sensed would be the final phase of their contest, a conclusion that would honor the incredible journey they had taken together and the thousands of people who had witnessed their demonstration of human excellence. Marine meets Royal Guard in a wordless duel. The crowd was frozen. The sun was setting over London, casting its final golden rays across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as James Mitchell and William Thompson entered the final phase of their extraordinary 4-hour contest. The crowd of over 1,200 people stood in absolute silence, sensing that they were about to witness the conclusion of what would be remembered as one of the most remarkable displays of military discipline and human excellence in modern history. James felt a deep sense of peace settle over him as he realized that this incredible journey was approaching its end. The wordless conversation he had been engaged in with William had taught him more about leadership, discipline, and the warrior spirit than any formal training he had ever received. Through their silent communication, he had discovered new depths of his own character and capabilities that would influence every aspect of his future. So the Marine began his final sequence, a demonstration that incorporated every principle of excellence he had learned throughout his military career. His movements became a tribute to every Marine who had come before him, every battle fought, every sacrifice made in service to his country. The precision and control he displayed seemed to transcend normal human limitations, transforming him into a living symbol of American military excellence. William felt equally moved as he prepared for his own concluding demonstration. The contest had connected him not just to James, but to the entire brotherhood of warriors who had served their nations with honor and distinction. His final routine would represent centuries of British military tradition and the ideals of duty, honor, and service that had guided generations of soldiers. The Royal Guard began a sequence of movements that represented the pinnacle of ceremonial military bearing. Every element of his demonstration honored the traditions of his regiment, while showcasing the individual excellence that had been forged through years of demanding training and combat experience. His performance was simultaneously personal and universal, representing both his own achievements and the collective spirit of British military service. As both men executed their final demonstrations, something extraordinary happened. The crowd began to sense that they were witnessing not just the end of a contest, but the culmination of something much more significant. The wordless communication between James and William had evolved into a shared statement about the potential for human excellence and the bonds that unite professional warriors across all boundaries of nationality and service. The thousands of spectators found themselves participating in a moment of collective transcendence. Military veterans in the crowd stood straighter, remembering their own moments of testing and achievement. Civilians felt inspired by the demonstration of what could be accomplished through dedication and discipline. Children watched wide-eyed, understanding intuitively that they were witnessing something special about the human spirit. Among the spectators, a group of military historians realized they were documenting a moment that would be studied and analyzed for decades. The display of discipline, endurance, and mutual respect they had witnessed represented the highest ideals of military professionalism and the possibility for competition to elevate rather than diminish both participants. As the final minutes of their contest approached, James and William seemed to reach an unspoken understanding. Their wordless communication had achieved a level of clarity and mutual respect that made further competition unnecessary. Each had proven not just his own excellence but his recognition of the excellence in his opponent. James slowly, with tremendous dignity and respect, shifted his stance to come to attention. It was a military salute without words, an acknowledgement of William's extraordinary skill and character. The movement was so perfectly executed and so clearly respectful that it conveyed honor both to the British Guard and to the traditions of military service that both men represented. William, recognizing the profound respect being shown to him, responded with an equally dignified acknowledgement. While maintaining his ceremonial position as required by his duties, he made a subtle adjustment to his bearing that any military person would recognize as a return salute. It was an acceptance of James's respect and an expression of his own admiration for the American Marines' incredible performance. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of Buckingham Palace. The ovation continued for several minutes, as thousands of people expressed their appreciation for what they had witnessed. The applause was not just for the individual performances of James and William, but for the demonstration of human potential and international friendship they had provided. News crews captured the emotional responses of spectators as the reality of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Veterans were openly moved by the display of military excellence they had seen. Civilians spoke of feeling inspired and privileged to have been present for such an extraordinary demonstration. International visitors expressed amazement at witnessing something that celebrated the best qualities of both American and British military traditions. James stepped forward from the crowd and approached William's position. The British Guard, while maintaining his ceremonial duties, was able to make brief eye contact with the American Marine. In that moment, a friendship was born that would last for the rest of their lives. Without words, they had shared an experience that few humans ever encounter, the complete exploration of their own potential, in partnership with a worthy opponent. As the crowd began to slowly disperse, many people lingered to savor the memory of what they had experienced. The British teenager who had documented the entire event announced to her global audience that they had witnessed something that would never be repeated or forgotten. Videos and photographs of the contest were already spreading around the world, inspiring discussions about military excellence, human potential, and international cooperation. The sergeant of the Royal Guards approached James as the ceremony concluded and, with quiet professionalism, thanked him for the honor he had shown to British military traditions. James responded with equal respect, expressing his admiration for the incredible skill and character demonstrated by William and all the Royal Guards. As darkness fell over London, James Mitchell walked away from Buckingham Palace knowing that his life had been permanently changed by the wordless duel he had shared with William Thompson. The contest had revealed depths of his own character and capabilities that would influence every challenge he would face in the future. William Thompson resumed his ceremonial duties with a renewed sense of pride in his service and his traditions. The extraordinary contest had reminded him why he had chosen military life and had demonstrated the universal bonds that connect all professional warriors regardless of their nationality or service branch. The story of their wordless duel would be retold for years to come, inspiring military personnel and civilians alike with its demonstration of excellence, respect, and the incredible potential that can be achieved when dedicated individuals push themselves beyond their perceived limitations. It had been 4 hours that proved the power of the human spirit and the bonds that unite those who serve their nations with honor and distinction.